Hello, friends. You are now listening to the Awe Inspiration Podcast with your host, Jagriti Luitel. Here, we examine high achievers' perspectives through a holistic lens, since we want to learn not what to think, but how to think. With a focus on space exploration, well-being, technology, and philosophy, I hope that these conversations will lead us on a journey to awe-inspiration. So, come with me. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first guest episode of the Awe-Inspiration Podcast. I am so excited to have Dr. Tupper here with me today. Dr. Tupper has had 30 plus years of experience in space systems engineering, with experience in academia, industry, the military, and intelligence community, as well as NASA, including as the chief engineer of the Science Mission Directorate at NASA HQ. He is currently the Goddard Spaceflight Center chief engineer, where he engages in the planning, management, and evaluation of engineering activities for all Goddard activities, including technical excellence, adherence to requirements, leading reviews, investigations, anomaly, and failure boards. His management experience includes 5 years as the chief of the Mission Engineering and Systems Analysis MESA division at GSFC, providing leadership and expertise in mission systems engineering, payload and instrument systems engineering, mission design, navigation, propulsion, attitude control, GNNC sensor and actuator technologies, as well as space systems protection through the entire life cycle. Here, he led 280 NASA engineers and over 500 contractors, placing emphasis on delivering on commitments, open communication across organizations, attention to diversity, and early career concerns. Prior to that, Tupper was the associate chief of the MESA division, and before that, the chief technologist of the Goddard Engineering Directorate. His technical experience includes engineering assignments at GSFC as the mission systems engineer for the Laser Interferometer Space Antenna LISA project and the GNNC lead for the LISA and James Webb Space Telescope missions. Prior to joining NASA in 2002, he gained experience in private sector leadership experience as the manager of the advanced technology for Honeywell Space Systems, where he led multiple development teams responsible for the pointing and vibration control for the payloads and observations for national security space programs. He often serves on the review boards for NASA and other government agencies for programmatic gate decisions, design, special studies, anomalies, and failures. He holds a doctorate in Aeronautical and Astronautical engineering from MIT. His graduate research was NASA-funded technology for optical interferometry and control of large space in space with JPL. His master's research at Stanford was in space robotics, and he retired in 2018 as a colonel and space intelligence officer in the U.S. Army Reserves. He holds 10 patents in the fields of guidance, navigation, control, momentum control, dynamics testing, and vibration control. He has received several NASA, military, and intelligence community awards, including the Robert H. Goddard Exceptional Achievement Award for leadership, and he interviewed for astronaut selection in January 2000. He resides in Severna Park, MD, married with 3 grown children and 2 lively Portuguese water dogs, and he enjoys sailing, photography, hiking, and geocaching. All right. That is a long resume. I'm excited to dive into it.
Okay.
But so that's a lot of achievements. So to understand it better, I just want to start by understanding your childhood better and what actually got you into being interested in space. So could you just talk a bit about what your childhood was like and how it shaped you into the person you are today.
Sure. I'm 56 years old, so I grew up in time to see the Apollo missions when I was a very little kid, and I do remember that. I grew up in rural Virginia, and always had an interest in flying. So started taking flying lessons when I was still in high school, I think, and got my flying license just out of college. But that interest in aviation spilled over into my interest in space. So when I went to college at MIT as an undergraduate, I was deciding between architecture and doing aerospace, and it was kind of the heyday of space shuttle flying, 6 or so, 7 times a year, until the Challenger accident happened, actually, which was sophomore year at MIT, and so that was kind of a make or break point. We wanted to see how many of the aerospace engineer sophomores would come back after January break when the accident happened and had switched majors, and it turned out nobody did. We all maintained our commitment to aerospace. So yeah, that was my path into being a space nut, as well as science fiction and the usual things.
Yeah. No, that's great. That also reminds me, I also try to get my pilot's license and to air cadets. I don't know, I think US might have something similar, like ROTC or something. Right. And then COVID happened, and then they canceled the whole program due to the pandemic. So I still have that left on my checklist, but someday.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so hearing that journey, like it seems like you probably needed motivation, or I don't know, something to keep driving you throughout all these years. There's no way only one event as a child would propel you for these many years.
Right.
So would you say that like there was a person that really believed in you in the trajectory of your journey, and who was that person for you? Was it a teacher, a family member, or just a science fiction book? So who were these people along your journey that kept propelling you forward in your journey?
Yeah. So like I said, I grew up in a very rural area, and most people there did, their aspirations were to follow in the footsteps of their parents, being a farmer or a waterman. And it was actually my 7th grade science teacher, Miss Tomlin, who really put the spark of discovery in front of me, and encouraged trial and error type experiments where we almost blew some stuff up and things like that. But that was sort of the opening of my eyes to the bigger science of the world, and so that was probably the person who propelled me toward a science and math focus.
Yeah. No, that just shows how important like teachers are, because anybody I listen to, they have this one person or several that really kind of believe in them or just show them something they hadn't seen before, and it completely changes their life. And also about the rural thing, I can relate to that because being born and brought up in Nepal, I couldn't see anything related to space. So I just had to like find my own way. And then when I came to Canada, explore all the opportunities, and they became more and more visible to me as well. So that's a relatable thing for me as well, which makes your journey even more impressive to me in my eyes.
So there is a podcast. I don't think it's still on anymore, but you can find the back episodes, and it was done by the prior NASA chief scientist James Green, and his podcast was called Gravity Assist. And he would interview different people, and he would always ask them, "Who was your inspiration?" which he called the Gravity Assist. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so now that we kind of know a bit about your background, I also want to get into the career part because, so how would you describe your academic journey? Were you always really into academics, or did that grow on you, or did you consider going into industry more, or just the journey of academia for you? How was it? Maybe even as a child and growing up.
Right. Yeah, going through high school in a rural area, I was not able to take like calculus, which most people do in high school now if they're going into a STEM field. So I had to take it sort of outside of school at a community college, and I took calculus 1, 2, and 3, college level calculus. And then I got to MIT, and they give you the exam to see like which class you should fit into. And I did not get into anything. So it was basically start over in calculus. So that was eye-opening for me. It's like, you are not as smart as you think you are. So
yeah.
The help that I had at MIT during freshman year was called Experimental Study Group. It was kind of a experimental group of freshmen that learned in different ways. And so based on my experience of not getting placed in calculus, I thought that would be helpful for me. And it turned out it was another one of these gravity assist moments, because my physics mentor under this program was a retired aerospace engineer, retired MIT professor named Robert Halfman, who was like famous in the 1950s. He designed the F-4U Corsair, one of the famous planes from World War II. And here he is retired. It was just his giving back to the community. And he ended up teaching me physics as a freshman, one-on-one, not even part of a class. And we spent most of the time talking about airplane design. So, that was a way into aerospace for me. And then once I did that, my grades were actually pretty good, such that all of my mentors within school just assumed I would go to grad school. But I had been in ROTC for all 4 years of college. I started out in Navy ROTC, and then I switched to Army halfway through. And so I had a commitment at the end of college to go join the Army. But they were able to delay that for 2 years so I could get my master's at Stanford. And again, one of the best mentors I had at MIT, Professor Andy von Floto, he was advising me, like, don't just stay at MIT forever, right? You need to go see other things. And to go to Stanford where the weather was better, and to see a whole new set of professors and courses, and be able to research on space robotics, which they were kind of known for, allowed me to do that. And then after I did my time in the Army, I came back to MIT to get my PhD. So,
no, that's incredible. Your journey actually reminds me of Dr. Richard Feynman. About how
that would be aspirational,
No, because he also I read his book recently, and he started off in MIT, and then every mentor was like, "Don't stay here. You need to branch out and go to another grad school." And went to Princeton, I think, based on a specific lab that was just really weird, and he found that intriguing. So that's great to learn about your academic journey. And so NASA has been a big part of your career, basically. But I wanted to hear more about, because that is what prompted me to ask you for this podcast in the first place. And in our previous conversation, we talked about the lessons you learned in NASA. So I wanted to ask you, what are the biggest leadership lessons you learned at your time at NASA, leading so many people into a huge mission?
Yeah. I think leadership everywhere, but especially in engineering and especially
Yeah.
at NASA, it happens at all sorts of levels. Even as an individual engineer, where you're responsible for designing some piece of something and analyzing it and getting it to be built, you're still leading through influence those around you, other people in your work group, or the technicians that are helping you put something together, and that sort of unofficial leadership, I think, is really important to recognize and develop. At NASA Goddard, we have a position called Product Development Lead, PDL, and a PDL is like a mini project manager, right? The title is not project manager, but you are responsible for your part of the project. So this might be delivering the attitude control subsystem. So for JWST, I was the PDL of the in the very early days of JWST, when it was first given the go-ahead to start, and we were kind of like blank sheet of paper on the design, and the contract was awarded, and we had to, nail down my part of it, which was the attitude control, like how does the telescope point at its targets. So I was leading a work group that included 10 people roughly, and some of them were at the prime contractor, Northrop Grumman, and some were Canadians because they were building the fine guidance sensor camera, and some were other NASA engineers. So that sort of leadership of a group of 10 on a technical topic, I think, was a good growing area for me. Later in my career, I became a NASA executive, and that's when I became the chief of the division here at Goddard that covers those topics of attitude control, guidance, navigation and control, flight dynamics, propulsion, and system engineering, which is very challenging in itself because you have to know a little bit about everything. That group here, called the Mission Engineering Division, was about 280 employees, and they are divided into branches. So that leadership is very different because you're not directly the supervisor of all 280 of those engineers, right? There's a first line supervisor who's a branch head. So the problems that come to you as the second level up supervisor are the hard ones that the first level couldn't fix, right? So you get to solve the hard problems, and you get to the biggest thing I learned when I became a leader of that many people was I no longer had time to be an individual contributor of myself, right? My personal outlook and self-worth was really about like being smart at inventing things, and that's not your job anymore when you're a leader of so many people. You have to stop taking pride in what you do individually and start taking pride in what your people do. So that's leadership lesson number one. Take pride in the good things that all your people do, and then celebrate it, give rewards to people, and shine a spotlight on people that are doing good things.
They
So
say like if something goes wrong, it's my responsibility. If something goes right, it's everybody else's
yes, exactly,
responsibility. Yeah.
exactly, yeah. Um,
No, the
yeah, and things did go wrong, and I got called into the principal's office, so to speak, to my boss or my boss's
yeah,
boss. So like,
yeah.
how come your people aren't delivering this piece
Mm,
of the spacecraft on time, and
mm-hmm,
um, that kind of thing. So it, but the other things I tried to do as a leader of so many people was keep open communication. In
mm-hmm.
fact, when I first came into the job, I had my secretary print out a list for me of all 280 people. And in the first 6 weeks, I think I had met individually or spoken to like 200 of the 280 people just
Wow.
by walking the halls and tracking them down and checking off who I had spoken to. And each question I asked, I always asked the same question, like, what are you worried about? And
Mm,
a lot of them
yeah.
were very like career type worries. What are we going to
Mm-hmm.
be working on next? Um, Everybody who works at NASA could have a much higher paying job
Mm,
outside of NASA. Like if you work
mm-hmm.
for a company that's building a
Yeah.
spacecraft for NASA, you make more money than you do working at NASA. So
Mm-hmm.
um,
No,
especially
that.
the early career engineers, I'm sure they came out of school and they had the choice to work for an aerospace company to make more money or
Mm,
work for the government and make less, but they did it for
service.
reason that when you're directly involved in designing the mission from scratch, it's so much more rewarding, right?
Mm,
NASA
yeah.
only ever builds one of anything, right? So
Mm-hmm. Mm,
and people spend their whole career on it. James Webb Space Telescope I worked on when I was a grad student in
wow.
1995, and it didn't launch until 2021.
Mm-hmm.
So um, that was, you know, 26 years off and on that I
Yeah.
worked on that project. And the scientists are even more like that, right? When
Yeah.
a principal investigator of a mission may contribute their entire career to getting that mission launched. So
Yeah.
it
No, that
it does take dedication. Yeah.
now that completely makes sense. I'm currently interning at the Canadian Space Agency, and I
Hmm.
see similar themes here as well. I ask everybody, why did you pick CSA over working for MDA or another aerospace company all the time? And
Right.
um, they mention similar reasons, as well as I want to be working for like the public, and it's still space, and it's like the good parts of everything. But there's pros and cons to everything. But it seems like um, people problems are harder than technical problems. Everybody else's problems becomes your problem, like basically. Yeah.
I just traveled to Ontario for a vacation. Our good friends live there,
Mm,
and we had some time to kill. And I went to the Air and Space Museum,
yeah.
for the Canadian National Air and Space Museum, which
Hmm.
is there in Ontario. And I was joking with my wife that the Canadian space industry is only famous for the robot arm, and I'm sure as soon as we walk in the museum, we're going to see the Canada arm. And sure enough, there it was.
Yeah. Yeah, it's in the front doors of CSA as well as soon as you walk in. But I think CSA is trying to, or Canadian Aerospace, they're trying to lead um, space agriculture, which I found interesting, and then space physiology. So like medical and agriculture
Right,
and robotics seems like
right,
the next frontier for them. Okay,
right.
so that's great to know. So I want to learn next about, so what is it about engineering for you that you just find so like, wow, this is like incredible, almost like a magic, because how do you have that level of motivation or like, work ethic to sustain that? So this question is in multiple parts. So what is the magic of engineering for you? And what advice would you give to aspiring engineers? Could be space engineers or otherwise. And what type of a person like should be one? And what type of person like shouldn't be one? Like, maybe there's some traits that like makes a bad engineer, and maybe just technical isn't enough.
Yeah, I think the magic of engineering is creating something from scratch, right? What is it? Necessity is the mother of invention.
Yeah.
If there's a need for something and it doesn't exist now, then someone has to invent that. And that's the engineering mindset, to go from a need to a piece of hardware or software that meets that need. And it is kind of magic. And the inspirations come from so many things. Like I saw this list of like all the gadgets on Star Trek, and then today, like how many of them are we don't have a transporter, but we do have things that are close to tricorders and communicators in your phone and so on. So the magic is inventing things for which there is a need. The type of person I think that becomes an engineer is the kid who took things apart as a kid, which I certainly was. And if you see that, if they enjoy building Legos, right, or something, right, they're starting from nothing and creating
something.
That's very much aligned with the engineering mindset. Yeah, and as my parents found out, every household appliance was left in hundreds of pieces that I was good at taking apart, but not so good at putting back together. And then in terms of people maybe who shouldn't be engineers, that there's probably the set of things that lead people to be lawyers, and the set of things that lead people to be science or engineers, and they're probably pretty disparate. So if the kid is arguing with his parents about why he should be allowed to do something, or arguing his way out of a punishment, that may indicate a future lawyer and not a future engineer.
No, those are important points, like about like breaking things apart. It sometimes I don't know, I seem to feel that like people think engineering is just like purely technical, but creativity seems to be like an important part of it, where it's like people that can come up with new solutions or have like an outside the box type of thinking is also a useful skill to have within engineering.
Right. And it helps to be able to think in 3 dimensions. And some people find that difficult. I remember those tests, like there's a picture of a box, and if you fold it up, what's going to be on the back side or something like that. Your brain has to a little bit think in 3 dimensions. And the people who are good at, for example, sewing, if you sew a shirt, you have to think in 3 dimensions, like, because you're going to make the stitches along the side, but your brain has to think of what the sleeve looks like folded, right? So that's another place where
that reminds me of a concept in chess where when grandmasters play, towards the end, it's like sometimes they're like so focused, but then one person walks up and like leaves, and then they come back and then they can see the bigger picture. So it's like a zoomed in and zoomed out. Being able to do both is like critical for them to win, basically. And even in math, I find it to be true. But okay, so that was about your career. So I kind of want to dive in more into the rest of your life. So as we mentioned, you have 3 kids. I just want to ask you, like, what has being a father taught you about life?
Um, yeah,
It's a difficult question.
this is orthogonal to the usual interview about satellites or large space telescopes. But yeah, certainly rewarding, like what does your life mean, so to speak. And certainly being a parent is an important part of having meaning in your life. Not that everyone needs to be a parent, but I certainly take a lot of joy in watching my 3 kids grow up. Right now they're 20, 25, and 30, so they're all grown up. But that is 30 years of being able to have the highs and lows, but the joys of seeing your child develop is a good respite, something to take your mind off of work, because an engineer's mind tends to go all the time, and if you're playing soccer with your kid, that's something that's very different than sitting in meetings arguing about some aspect of a satellite design.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So I am still curious, like, I'm also 20, and when I look forward at the life, I'm like, it's already such a big commitment to have a fulfilling career that you enjoy, that excites you, because it will be a lot of work. And on top of that, how do you handle like kids? And then, so I just wanted to ask you about your insights on work-life balance, or if that even exists, or how you did that in your own journey.
Yeah, I think it's definitely evolving toward the better, and COVID was a huge, shakeup of all of that. But early in my career, when I worked in industry, almost all the engineers were men, and now when I work here at NASA, it's probably 40% women, and the women are very represented in leadership positions. There's a project that we have here, which is a follow-on to the James Webb Space Telescope, called Roman Space Telescope, and nearly all of the engineering leaders there are women. So every so often they post a Facebook picture of, like, 7 women and 1 guy deciding something in a meeting, and they're like, oh, well, they let the token male join their meeting, I guess.
Yeah, that's funny.
And because of that, I think the work-life balance and dealing with kids is becoming much better. Everybody travels. So I think the time spent away from home is probably the hardest, and space engineers and project managers and scientists are not immune from that. For example, here at NASA, most of our satellites are not made, at NASA. They're made by companies that build satellites. So we have to spend time at their facilities, and that's time away from the family, which is hard. But people tend to share those responsibilities, so it's not the same person who needs to go on these trips all the time. And there's a community of people on your project. It feels kind of like a family. We look out for each other, and if you need to be gone in the middle of a test campaign for a week because your son is at Boy Scout camp and you're on the hook to be the adult advisor who's going with them, then somebody else covers for you. So at least at NASA, it's pretty good. And then COVID changed everything. And I think we're just coming to grips with the future of how engineering work is done with hybrid, the things you can do on your computer, you can do from home, and things where you need to touch hardware, you must be in person. But there's a huge gap between those two things. There's the, team interactions. And so at least at Goddard, I would say we're probably back to people being at work 3 or so days a week, even if they could do their work entirely from home, just to have the team interactions. And obviously it depends on what you're doing. But if you're in a part of the life cycle of the development of a space mission, there's certain key times where a lot of decisions are made. And if you don't have the input of everybody leading up to your big design reviews, then you might not do as good a design as you could have, right? So,
No,
we're finding our balance. Yep. And it's not just NASA. I mean, the whole aerospace industry is like this, right? The companies that are hiring want to hold work flexibility out as an attractive thing to get new engineers to come. But the new engineers are the one who needs the mentoring and the hands-on work the most. So,
it's complex.
They're the ones who should be in person, along with their mentors.
Right. Yeah. No, that's great to know. That reminded me of how in sociology humans were meant to live like communally. So leaving your kids with another family and you go and hunt or something and then come back, and then like the communal part seems to be like important so that everybody has it easier, basically, for the greater good. Okay, so talking about greater society, so if there's a student listening in from Nepal or any other developing countries where their circumstances, like myself, before I was in Canada, we didn't have anything, don't allow them to like do something because it's not visible to them. And I see that difference between kids growing up in Western countries versus rest of the world. How would you encourage them to like think big, go after your dreams and beyond their circumstances? Because in your own journey, you did that.
Yeah. I think all children are born scientists, right? If you watch a 2-year-old play with a blade of grass or a bug or something like that, they're naturally inquisitive. So if we don't do things that remove that inquisitive spirit, but instead encourage that inquisitive spirit, there's no end to it, right? When kids are 4 and 5 and they start asking questions about how something works, right? And that happens in third world countries as much as first world. There's always something to be inquisitive about. It could just be nature, or how some farm implement works, or radio or television, or and feeding that spirit of inquisitiveness, I think, is what's necessary. So the adults in these kids' lives need to feed that inquisitiveness, and that could be teachers or parents or the coach of your soccer team or whatever that has an influence in your development should influence it toward that. Yeah.
So like rewarding curiosity instead of like kind of punishing them for it. And I love your point about like take inspiration or like be inquisitive about anything. I saw this like Japanese bullet train design that they were doing, and they took inspiration from this bird for like the aerodynamics to make it go faster, basically.
Right.
So maybe people from there have an advantage that somebody that has everything available to them might not, and like looking at it as an advantage might be the key to solving a problem that people might not otherwise.
Yeah. Nature's had 4.5 billion years to figure out the best designs for things, and we should copy them whenever we can, right? And the same thing with medicines, right? That the answer to curing all our diseases are in plants. We just have to find them.
Yeah, that's why that all like tribes from different parts of the world sometimes scientists are looking into that. Okay, so because we're still keeping on the theme of engineering, what obligation do you think engineers have for the betterment of the greater society, not just in their technical work, but like in the grand scheme of things? What role do engineers play?
Yeah, there's many engineering programs in college require a course in engineering ethics. And if they don't, they should, because the engineer can cover in their design so many things that have an effect on society. And it could be as simple as, safety of a bridge, right? You don't want the bridge to fail and people to die. But it could also be as sort of world changing as, some climate mitigation, right? Storing carbon out of pulling carbon out of the air, which is a huge engineering challenge, and the motivation for people to work on these big society-changing engineering problems is not just because it's a job or they get a paycheck out of it, right? It's because they can change the world. So, yeah, I think that is an important part of engineering. And science as well. Not that dissimilar is the scientist who has these ethical decisions about, should we clone a human or something like that. They're really big ethical decisions. So just because you can do it, should you do it, and what safeguards should you have in place? Because we here at NASA we have our technical workforce is roughly half scientists and half engineers. And they always ask, well, why do you want to be a scientist or why do you want to be an engineer and what's the difference? And I said, the scientist says, oh, that's awesome. That was not expected. and the engineer says, oh, crap. That was not expected.
Yeah.
If you find joy in something that was unexpected, you're a scientist. And if something unexpected happens when you're engineering, that's the opposite of joy. You're like, oops, a big oops.
No, that makes sense. It's like engineering is about creating something that didn't exist before, whereas science, like being in science or being a scientist, is discovering that already exists, but people just like don't know about it yet.
Didn't know it, right?
Yeah, but this reminds me of how in the middle when you were talking about ethics, maybe that's a time where the engineering kid and the law kid could be friends.
Right.
Yeah, and then teach each other the ethics as well as, back and forth, basically. So
Right.
we're towards the end of the episode, but towards the end, I tend to ask a set of questions to every single guest, but they're the same questions.
Sure.
Other questions I differ, but okay. So the first question is, and this can be shorter, one piece of advice you would give to your younger self.
My younger self was probably too interested in balancing risk of doing more crazy things. So I would advise my younger self to take more risks in career or
Life.
The types of things to work on, because you don't want to look back at things you could have done.
No, that's really amazing. So that's advice for your own younger self, but now for advice to the next generation, what should somebody in their 20s or early career focus on? What should be the most important thing they think about?
Right. Well, it should probably not be the money that they're making at their next job, because the paycheck is not what you'll remember when you're my age. Instead, it will be the impact that you left in the field. So, working on things that make a difference will be naturally more rewarding in the long run, even if the paycheck is not as big.
Okay. So this one is a bit more complex, but I'll just give a bit of background. So when we go through life, and I'm a bit philosophical, so when we go through life, do you think we choose who we are? So do we choose ourselves, or should we be ourselves? Because we often hear advice of people being like, just be yourself, be just who you are. And then it's like, but I can choose who I am also. So what do you think?
Yeah. It's probably like the nature versus nurture question, which is a bit of both. And certainly, I think you should be perspective, take an outside look at yourself. And if there's things you don't like, work toward changing those. Right?
So almost like reflect and then analyze what's going right, the things that aren't. In those cases, choose yourself and change it. And in other cases, keep being yourself. Okay. So I tend to ask this next question because, when I talk to very high achieving people and they've done so much, it almost is hard for me to think that they're human, but we all know they're human. So a question I like to ask them is what is something you're struggling with right now? Because it seems like your whole life is perfect, and it's again, looking back, we can connect the dots, but I need to feel like you're a human right now also. So what is something you're working on currently? Because life seems like an endless list of working on things.
Yeah, life is always an endless list of working on things. Where I am in my career, I have paths ahead of me that could mean retiring from the government or leaving the government and working for aerospace industry or working in other parts of the government. And those are all attractive, but then you're also really comfortable what you're doing now, right? And so I mentioned my kids are 20, 25, and 30. So the last one is sort of leaving the house now and becoming an empty nester. So my wife and I are not tied to geographically to any given place, right? So there's this, window of opportunity to move somewhere else, and jumping on to something new versus enjoying where I am,
what you have,
I guess, is sort of an existential thing that churns in the back of my mind and keeps me up at night sometimes. So it's not all wonderful. But what is wonderful is I have 2 Portuguese water dogs who are 2 and 6 years old, and they're crazy and fun, and you cannot be upset with yourself for too long with them around. Because,
no, that's great. Now I can see you as a human, not just like a robot that did all these things.
Right.
So what do you think is more important, climb up the mountain or view at the top? So the journey, or like when you get there and then you have it.
Right. I don't know. I would probably say the climb.
You spend more time doing it.
You spend more time doing it, and if your outlook is, well, I just have to get through this climb so I can have the nice view, then you won't look back at the whole experience as positive. You'll think, oh, well, I had to do that hard climb so I could have this good view. But if you set your mind the other way and enjoy the climb,
enjoy the process.
You'll remember the overall experience more, right?
Yeah. Okay, so this is the second last question, and this is the hardest one. I have to ask it to every person I meet. So why do you think we're here, and what's the meaning of life?
I don't know. That seems a little bit extending into religion and everything else. But for regardless of why we're here, I think while we're here, we should do what we can to help our fellow persons and the planet. So, if everybody took that outlook of bettering humanity and nature, you will leave your life better than you came into it. So that's what we should do.
I like how you. I like how you like said like a better question to ask is what should we do when we're here, instead of asking like why are we here. Like that's a very big question. No, I liked how you answered with a question. Okay, so the last question for this is, I want you to ask a question to the next guest, and we don't know who it is, and I will ask them. I will ask them this question, and then in the end, they'll ask another person, basically. So it's like
it's a pass on the question to the next person.
Yes.
I know you're going to ask about what inspiration they had as a kid already, so I don't want to take that one, but it is a good one to always ask. I will instead ask, what are you doing to help the planet? Because that's what I think about a lot, and what we do at NASA certainly is helping with that. But if from what I know now, if I was going to change careers, I think it would be something toward the green economy, applying engineering and innovation to, fixing the world's biggest problem. So,
all right. No,
what is the next
that's
person doing to fixing the world's biggest problem? Right?
Okay. That'll be interesting to find out because I don't know who my next guest is. But okay.
Okay.
That's all my questions. Is there any final comments you have before we?
No, thank you. Thank you for doing this, Jigar.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.